Hi, I'm Jody Adams, and today I'm going to make Parmesan fennel breadsticks here at Rialto. These are what we put in every bread basket, and it's actually quite a very simple recipe to make. We start with a sponge, let it rise, add the rest of the dough ingredients, let that rise, and then you actually just let it sit overnight, and the next day roll them out and bake them. So, simple ingredients. I have a little bit of sugar, and that sugar is important because the yeast needs something to eat quickly. Yeast, and we use dry yeast here. And then all-purpose flour. Mix them together and add water. This is a very wet mixture. And essentially what's happening here is you're getting the yeast working. It's feeding on the sugar first and then the flour, producing carbon dioxide, which causes the bread and the sponge to rise, and a little alcohol, and the alcohol ultimately gives the bread the nice flavor. And that's why we like to do this overnight, so that the dough actually develops an interesting flavor. You can see that we made one early this morning, and it's incredibly lively. In the recipe, it calls for proofing the sponge. That means actually proving that it has developed, that the yeast has developed, and you have some action there. I'm going to combine the sponge in the KitchenAid mixer with the rest of the dough ingredients. And you could do this on the counter by hand, but it's very messy. So I have grated Parmesan cheese, fennel seeds, which I love. Sometimes my staff jokes and says, "And fennel seeds?" I don't always put fennel seeds in everything. Salt, and it doesn't need a whole lot of salt because you have the salt from the Parmesan cheese. And then a lot of olive oil. We like that. And you want an olive oil that has good flavor, big flavor. It actually will flavor the dough. And then flour. And again, that's just all-purpose flour. Start slowly so you don't make a mess. Like that. And then this should mix for about 9 minutes. You really want to develop the gluten in the dough. So I just added a tiny bit of water to the dough. I noticed that in the base of the bowl there was a dry, it was a little bit dry with flour. I added about a tablespoon of water, and it just brought everything together. Okay. And if you're so inclined and you want a little bit of exercise, you can do this by hand. It's a fairly stiff dough, but this way it will pull it all together. So this is a great workout, back and forth. I always tell people to take your Pilates stance and move with your hips, not just with your arms. Making bread was one of the first things I learned how to do when I was in high school, and I made it all the time. And I find it to be incredibly satisfying. Okay, so I have a nice smooth dough. You want some tension because as the dough rises, you want it to hold some structure. So here's my beautiful dough. It's nice and springy, which means that I've kneaded it nicely. I've rolled it in oil, and I'm going to let it rise covered with plastic so that the outside of the dough doesn't dry out. Okay, so I have this beautiful dough here. This is a dough that rose and fell because I punched it down and then sat overnight in the refrigerator. So it has some nice texture to it. It has some nice flavor because it has time to age, and it's ready to be rolled into breadsticks. So I'm just going to use a simple rolling pin, and I want to take these to about 12 inches long, 1/4 of an inch thick. Okay. And they're about 1/2 inch across. And you can stretch them a little bit like this. And I'm putting them on a piece of parchment paper so they don't need to be oiled or anything like that. So this makes about 40 to 50 breadsticks, and you could make breadsticks with half the dough and then freeze the rest of the dough. Or you could actually cut them and freeze them. You want the dough to come back to room temperature. And you can do, all kinds of things. You could tie these in knots. You could, make a little hook or something. I let them rise for about 30 minutes. You just want them to get a little poof in them, because if I were to bake them like this, they would be denser than I want. So after these rise for 30 minutes, I'm going to put them in a 325-degree oven for about half an hour. They bake for half an hour. You want them to be nice and golden, and then I turn off the oven, leave the doors open, and let them sort of dry out in the oven for about 20 minutes and cool down. And then you have these beautiful breadsticks. And you see, even our professional bakers produce something that's slightly uneven. But you can see how they've risen and poofed.